Today we're making coil pots.
You're going to start by twisting your piece of clay and getting the amount of clay that you want to become the bottom of your pot. Any clay that you don't need right away, roll back up so that the air doesn't touch it and it won't dry out. Starting with the ball, you're going to roll it and round it, and then begin pinching and turning to flatten it evenly across. We don't want it flatter on the sides and thicker in the middle. We want it to be the same thickness all the way across.
Almost like a little hamburger patty. Once you've started to flatten it in your hands, then you're going to transfer it to the table and continue to flatten and flip it using the heel of your hand.
Gently flatten and flip. It's important to flip it a lot. We want to flatten just a tiny bit and flip, otherwise it could stick to the table.
Then make sure it's about the thickness of your pinky finger.
And then choose a side to carve your name into. When you carve your name, you don't want to go too deep because we don't want to push through the clay. So we want to just kind of press it gently into the surface of the clay. And the reason I'm pressing the tool like this is if I dragged my tool instead, it would create those little rough spots like this. And when you do that, these little spots can be very sharp. You can see they're sticking up now, it's just clay, so you can smooth it back down. But if I fired it that way, it would be like little knives and it would be very sharp. Now we want to flip the clay over so our name is on the bottom and pick up an amount that's comfortable to roll our first coil. We want to begin rolling our coil by kind of squeezing and turning that clay in our hand, rotating it and starting to become a coil in our hand. And once it's started, then you can transfer that coil to the tabletop and roll it with one or both hands. You can kind of experiment and see what feels comfortable. And naturally you're going to push a little harder with your dominant hand, so one end of your coil will be thicker and one end will be thinner. So I actually don't want this thin side to be much thinner than what it is. So I'm just going to gently tap because it got a little flat, and then I'm going to work on rolling this thicker side out so that it matches and it's the same thickness all the way down. Now that I have my coil rolled out evenly and it's the same thickness across, about as fat as my pinky finger, now I'm ready to lay that coil on top of the base. And if I lay it on carefully right above, when I go to the second layer, if I go right above the first layer, the pot's gonna come up straight. If I lay it just outside that first layer, it might come out more like a bowl shape. I'm gonna lay mine right on top. And then this is the most important part. We have to make that coil attached to the base. Otherwise, if we just leave it like this, it'll completely fall apart when it's drying.
With our hand supporting from the outside, we're going to use our fingertip to scrape down and attach those pieces.
And blend down so that it connects the coil together and connects that coil to the base. And you can see I'm pushing down about 3 or 4 times and then turning it. So I make sure to go all the way around. And once I get all the way around, it leaves these little fingerprints. So now I can take and just smooth those out with my thumb by turning and smoothing it from the inside while I'm holding and supporting it from the outside.
This needs to be done very well before you will receive more clay.
Now we have our next chunk of clay, and we're going to twist off. I'm going to twist this and break it into like thirds, so I'm going to twist off just the end here. We don't want to start with too much clay because it makes it hard to roll our coil. And it's easiest to roll our coil right on the tabletop. Again, we're going to start that coil in our hands by rolling and kind of squeezing and turning it. And then once it starts to become a coil,
we're going to transfer it to the table and use the palms of our hands to roll it out the rest of the way.
If it starts to get that flat side, what you can do is take the coil, prop it up on its edge, and gently tap wherever it's flat. It'll make it more of a square, and then roll it again. If it still flattens back out, do it again. gently tap, and then roll. So it becomes more of a round circle if you were to cut it. The middle is starting to get a flat. You can hear it. Hear that? That means it's flat here. So I'm gonna gently tap, and we're getting kind of thin here. We don't wanna get too thin because it'll make it hard to blend, so that looks pretty good, pretty even. Now we can take and layer our next piece onto our coil pot. You can see I started right where my last coil ended, and I'm laying it around. Anytime we add a new coil, we're gonna stop and blend. So we're holding it and supporting it from the outside while we're blending on the inside. Alright, so you can see I'm attaching my last coil to the top edge. I broke off this little extra piece that I didn't need because I wanted it to be kind of an even height across the top. And I'm blending and attaching that last coil on so that it stays connected and fills in any of those little gaps. You don't want any holes. And then, once we get that last one attached, we can do some final blending, making sure we got all of those fingerprints smoothed out, making sure that we don't have any spots that look dry or cracked. We can even use a little bit of water on our fingertip, one fingerprint at a time. If there's any cracks on the outside like there is right here, you can use it one fingerprint of water and blend until it completely disappears and it's not shiny anymore. If you leave it shiny, it's going to weaken the clay and it could start to kind of melt and fall apart in that spot. So if you do use water, be careful to make sure that you blend until that shininess goes away, and it means the water has soaked into the clay in that spot, and it won't weaken your clay, and it just makes it nice and smooth.
Your last step is adding designs, and you can do that with any of the tools on your table.
I'm going to use a marker cap to add some on the inside. Just have to be careful if you're using anything that presses into the clay, not to press too deep. Once you think you're all finished, just double check that no more smoothing or blending needs to happen. Check around the whole inside, check around the whole outside, and then double check that you can still read your name. And if you can, you're all done. You can bring it to the back table.